Hi everybody, welcome to our Google Plus Hangout with the Buck Institute for Education. I'm John Larmer, the Editor-in-Chief here at BIE, and this is our second Hangout of September on the topic of the Gold Standard for Project-Based Learning. Tuesdays at noon is our new time for Hangouts this year. The Hangout will last about 30 minutes, and you can post questions on the Google Plus events page, and we'll take a look at them during the Hangout, probably answer them at the very end. It'll last for about 30 minutes, like I said, and the Hangout will be archived. You can catch it later or tell your friends at BIE.org. We archive all of our Hangouts. And there's also a blog posted on our website at BIE.org by John Mergenthaler, our director, on the Gold Standard for PBL. There's a place there to offer comments on this idea of why we need a gold standard for project-based learning. So today's topic, like I said, is gold standard in a global context. What is a global gold standard? What might it look like and how might it be used? We have some great guests with us today, 3 guests. To my left, David Ross, BIE's Senior Director. And we have Gina Olabuenaga down in Orange County, California, who is our Curriculum and Faculty Manager. And special guest, Bernie Trilling, who is the founder and CEO of 21st Century Learning Advisors. So, welcome, Bernie. Thanks for being here. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to toss out I have 4 or 5 questions. I'll start with sort of an overall view of where have you guys been around the world? Is PBL catching on worldwide, and where are we seeing it? So, Gina, how about you start?
Okay, so I've been to a few different places. Somewhere we've done a lot of work is in Canada. I've also been to the UK, and we've worked with 2 different organizations there, with the Innovation Unit and with the Studio Schools Trust. Last year we did PBL World Australia, where we did a series of one-on-one workshops with teachers in Australia. And lastly, Singapore. We've done quite a bit of work there as well. And it definitely does seem to be catching on, because once schools start doing it and they hear that we're in town, more are interested.
Oh, and I should add, Gina, you also helped one of our national faculty members develop our PBL 101 workshop in Spanish for some recent work in Mexico, even though you weren't there yourself.
Correct. Nor do I speak Spanish, I'd like to say, for the record.
All right. So, Bernie, tell us about your travels in PBL land.
Well, yeah, I've been at this for a while. So in my work with ThinkQuest a while back, which was a global program of doing projects, the project specifically was creating really amazing websites on a passionate topic that the kids had. And those were teams all over the world. What I saw is great growth in certain countries. In fact, at one point, India surpassed the U.S. in number of students involved in it. And that happened to be because we found a network of schools that crossed all of India, and it was implemented throughout the school systems there. So I think, it's really variable. I think the desire for PBL is at an all-time high, and it's skyrocketing right into the stratosphere. I think deep implementation is another story, and that's where it's more spotty. And integration. I think there's a lot more work to be done on integrated. And certain countries, you mentioned Singapore. Singapore has been working hard, and I think they've trained every teacher in project-based learning 3 times over. But of course, they have certain factors like national exams that when that happens, projects go out the door. So that deep integration is something that is really something we're looking forward to seeing more of. Great work in Australia. I've been there a number of times. I'm going to China next week. The Ministry of Education is really interested in going further in China, and you guys have done some wonderful work also there. Maybe not a less pleasing story was the UK. UK was just flying toward integration of project-based learning, and then they sort of hit a change in government and a change in funding, and things kind of stopped a bit. They were actually going to rebuild every one of their schools in the UK to be more project-oriented physically, but the funding for that got cut. So I think it's a real mixed bag across the planet. You can spin that little globe there, David. It's a mixed bag, but I think the desire is at an all-time high, and there's a lot of other factors that go along with integration that now need to be worked on so that PBL is easier to do for everyone.
Yeah. All right, thanks, Bernie. Dave, where have you been?
Quite a few countries, and I would agree with Bernie that the interest globally is at an all-time high, but it extends back several years. We worked for 3 years in Costa Rica with the Ministry of Ed and the Omar Dango Foundation, We worked for a couple of years in the Dominican Republic as well. And there's an ebb and flow to the work. Often the work is promoted by politicians or nonprofits in a country, and then there's a political change, and the work disappears quite quickly. And so my concern in moving forward with this work is that we create something that's sustainable, that it's not predicated on the whims of politicians. The growth sector for us is definitely Asia. We've worked in multiple times in South Korea and Singapore, growing work in China. We've got interest from another half a dozen different countries there. One of the more interesting developments is this workforce issue that a lot of the countries are seeing. And so in January, I'll be meeting with the Korean Ministry of Education and the Korean Development Institute, which wants to bring in project-based learning because they think of it as a workforce issue. So again, all over the world, we have to focus on sustainability, but Asia really is the growth sector.
Well, I should probably add that we've seen several countries, translators in several countries asked to translate our books, the Project-Based Learning Handbook primarily. So Korea, Japan, Portuguese in Brazil. There's a Chinese, two kinds of Chinese, right? Taiwan and Mandarin. There's an Arabic version, a professor in Jordan translated recently. So there's about 9 different translations now of our materials. So definitely worldwide interest in that respect too. All right, so let's talk about some of the variations in PBL. So are you seeing variations in the way people think about PBL or do PBL, or any special sort of emphases or local twists you've seen? Bernie, how about if I start with you this time?
Sure. Well, we have 50 countries here in the United States, and there's variations across across the United States, much less the world. Yeah, I see a variety of things. I think the East-West contrasts are pretty interesting. Eastern and the Far East education systems have been a little more didactic and a little more structured. So the idea of projects being the main course and the meal is a little harder to pull off, I think, in that environment. But places like Singapore are approaching it. And again, a lot of it has to do with assessment. Assessment kind of drives what their assessment systems are like. Kind of drives whether PBL is braced deeply or more shallowly. I think Australia has done some wonderful things. I think we've seen some of the best larger projects in Australia, and I think it's because they have kind of a frontiersman mentality there. Let's try something. Let's go for it. And they have sort of a loose structured government system. It's not very federal. It's very state-oriented, and so there's a lot of freedom. So I think it varies a lot, but I think a good project is a good project everywhere, and especially if it really hits on what a student really cares about, if it's really compelling, if it really appeals to the student's passions and interests, and then also if the teacher's willing enough to let go of some of the control and have kids take more of the responsibility to kind of direct the learning and manage the learning and do project management as students. When that really happens, and those two things are combined, the interest and the student-centeredness of it, projects become really wonderful. And I think that what we're seeing now is the importance of presenting projects to the public, and I think that's been really true of the deeper learning networks of schools. Like Expeditionary Learning and High Tech High and New Tech Network, that all of them really do present those projects. The students actually present those projects to the general public on exhibition nights and demonstrations and fairs. And I think that's starting to catch on more in the U.S., but it's starting to catch on now in other places too. And that may be one of the strongest motivations for getting good support for PBL are those exhibitions.
Dave, how about variations in PBL that you've seen, or local twists?
One of the more interesting things to me is actually why a country comes to PBL and why they're interested in it. For instance, in the Dominican Republic and Costa Rica, it was very much about workforce development. And those aren't countries that in particular have these very high stakes, winner-take-all assessments that get kids into college and determine their financial success for the rest of their lives. And so they approached it from a workforce development issue. Conversely, in Asian countries, we're seeing exactly the same thing, is they're approaching it from a workforce development perspective, in the sense that It's about creativity, it's about entrepreneurship, it's about innovation, it's about the makerspace, it's about the willingness and ability to be a risk taker. And so they don't see, from my perspective, the Asian countries that have these high stakes tests, that it's enough to prepare their kids to get into college, because what happens after college, and what about the learning that occurs in college? And there's also everywhere, universally, this problem with engagement. It doesn't matter what country you go to, you see these vast chasms of engagement for kids. Every educator in every country recognizes that, and that something must be done, or we're going to wash away a generation of kids. So to me, the focus is not so much about the variability of how PBL is implemented. I believe what Bernie said, a good project is a good project no matter what country you are in. Why does a country come to PBL? I think that's a more interesting question.
Mm-hmm. Gina, your thoughts on that one?
Well, I definitely see a pattern emerging here in terms of why countries are coming to project-based learning. The UK, for example, they really were focused on authenticity and student disengagement. So how do we use project-based learning to bring students back into the fold while also preparing them for life after the K-12 system? They in particular, Studio Schools Network is working to develop partnerships with local communities, so our local community organizations and businesses, and these businesses are actually coming to students and asking them to help them solve problems. And as part of that relationship, students are also having the opportunity to work 2 days a week for full pay. It's not an unpaid internship, but rather full pay to get job experience, in addition to the project work that they're doing back in the classroom to support these local community organizations, businesses, and with that comes working with experts on a regular and consistent basis to contextualize the learning that students are doing and make it more meaningful for them. So they've had some really tremendous success with that, but it really was rooted in how do we get students engaged so they can be successful for the rest of their lives. And Dave had mentioned, the idea of entrepreneurialism, innovation. That's all part and parcel of this work, that they want students to be business-minded, creative, and independent. So that's been fun to kind of watch that unfold, both through the innovation unit and through Studio Schools Trust in the UK.
All right, thanks. Third question gets at the gold standard then, some kind of a description, a model of best practices in project-based learning. So would setting a gold standard for effective PBL be helpful in spreading PBL around the world to more students and teachers? And if so, why? Let me start with, how about Dave on that one to start?
Well, I think there's great appeal, and we've heard this from a lot of different folks around the world, to have something that is a gold standard, because one of the distinctions we make in the U.S. is these fluff projects that we label as dessert projects, and virtually every state in the country has these things. Well, this is not specific to the United States. There are lots of countries. I read blogs from all over the world. I read reports from all over the world, news stories from all over the world, and they talk about these schools that are doing project-based learning. And if we were to apply anything approaching a rigorous standard of what good design is or good implementation is, these really are pretty much fluff. So I think the entire, and we face the problem of, as the interest expands, there's a dilution of quality. And so it doesn't mean that the Buck Institute has to own the gold standard. We have to help create the gold standard, because we really owe it to the kids that they are not participating in projects that are really fluff projects.
Gina, how about you in this one?
Well, I think the need for the gold standard is important because it's going to help us have a common language. It's going to help us have conversation about the work that we're doing and be able to actually hold each other accountable, because we have a common understanding about what makes for effective PBL. We can refine our practices and share and collaborate in ways that we can't currently when we are not talking about the same thing, or we have the challenges like Dave presented of not having main course projects, right? So students are engaging in these project-light experiences, and that we can't really have a conversation if we're not doing the same level of work. So I think that that'll be really important to our success, and as PBL implementers around the world, whether you are part of the New Tech Network or you're using BIE's model, it'll just really help to set the standard.
Okay. Bernie, how about your thoughts on would setting a gold standard for effective PBL be helpful? Bernie.
I think we've actually had a first world problem with technology, and we've temporarily lost Bernie, so we're going to hope he dials in quickly.
Oh, okay. All right. We'll get back to Bernie on that one. So my next question gets into some of the challenges then. So this idea of spreading an international gold standard for PBL around the world. What would be some challenges, perhaps, in that kind of effort? And I'll start with Gina on this one.
I think, honestly, one of the things that will make it challenging are the nuanced differences in language. When we say one thing, does that translate quite the way we mean in another language? Our experience working in Mexico was a prime example of what do you mean when you say driving question? That doesn't quite translate perfectly into Spanish. So it's about making sure that we have a common understanding of the sentiment and the meaning behind the language, so that way we get at the right idea. But I think that's something that I think we all have a shared agreement on certain things that are important about project-based learning. We just have to make sure that we identify what that spirit of the name is, so that way we can understand the work that we're doing.
Okay. Dave, your thoughts on challenges?
Yeah, there are several, and some of them are superficial and some of them are substantive. And I'll talk about one of the ones that's superficial. We had a conference, as Gina mentioned, in fall of 2013 in Australia, and one of the teachers felt as though the only way you could do project-based learning is if you had the perfect kids in the perfect classroom with the perfect technology, and that's the only way the PBL would be successful. Well, I mentioned to him the fact that we had worked in the Dominican Republic, and in particular I had been in schools in which that country has a fluctuating power grid, and every school next to the principal's office is a room full of car batteries. When the power goes down, they turn on the car batteries, and that's how they power up everything in the entire building. So it's not a resource issue, but there's a perception that one of the primary barriers to good PBL is resources. But there is a substantial cultural issue. I worked in the Middle East last summer with country representatives from Kuwait and Iraq and Iran and Libya and Syria, and there are significant cultural issues about the role of a teacher in a classroom, this sage on the stage as opposed to the guide on the side. That's a significant cultural change for a lot of countries there. And we also have a significant cultural issue that dates back thousands of years in the Asian countries, because they have an educational system that's primarily based on a Confucian model, and they also have these high-stake tests. So if you cannot convince teachers that their students will be as successful, or parents, that their kids will be as successful in a PBL classroom and still get into the college that they want to get into, we have a huge hurdle to overcome there. So again, perceptual issues that may or may not be real, but significant cultural issues to roll in PBL out internationally.
Yeah, Dave, I've heard in some classrooms, and I forget whether it was Africa or Middle East, the idea of having students ask questions was a whole new idea, as opposed to just sit there quietly, listen, absorb, take notes. So, and questions are so fundamental to our thinking about project-based learning.
Yeah, I want to tag on to what John just said. And so one of the significant things about language is people obviously speak different languages, but there are different genres of language, and that's the way people interact with the language that they speak. And in many, many cultures, it is not culturally appropriate for kids to engage in a one-on-one dialogue, a Q&A, with an adult, whether it's their parent or a teacher. So if questions are a significant feature of a good project-based learning, is how do we be culturally sensitive so that we can equip kids and teachers to do something that is so crucial to project-based learning.
Okay. We're still trying to get Bernie, but meanwhile, I wanted to ask my final question, and we can get back to Bernie if he joins us for some of his thoughts on challenges and what a gold standard might do. So imagine 5 years from now, if there were a gold standard in place that was internationally promoted and agreed to and followed, what would we hope to see? What might a gold standard look like in 5 years? What might PBL look like around the world in 5 years? So, Gina, I'll toss it back over to you.
Well, my first hope is that this will help teachers and educators begin to engage in dialogue and conversation, not just with the teacher across the hall, but with teachers around the world. learning from each other's projects, their cultural context, the ways that they're working within their unique context to bring to life project-based learning. I think that our work as PBL educators is going to continue to grow, and we have a way to communicate with each other about the work that we're doing. You know, because I think at the end of the day, all of us want to improve teaching and learning for students, to make what they learn relevant, to make what is important to them present in the classroom. So that's the first hope that I have for the Gold Standard. But I also hope that it improves the quality of projects. I want to hear about, you know, there are the small scale projects that are really important and happen all the time, but I want to hear about these really big projects that change the world in some way. And I think with more people doing that, we have a greater chance of those things happening as well.
Right, there'll be lots of good stories to share about the same, you know, people think the same about project-based learning. It makes storytelling easier and sharing projects easier. Dave, how about your thoughts on 5 years from now?
Well, I would agree with Gina. One of the things that I would hope that would happen within 5 years is there's some consensus around what a quality project looks like. Because again, I think it damages the movement when people say that they are doing project-based learning and it really is fluff and there's no rigor to the work. Kids aren't developing 21st century skills. They're not preparing themselves for college or career or community. So a global gold standard could be a significant step in that direction. The other thing I think that would be important, and Gina touched upon this as well, is this idea that we all have a shared vocabulary around what good instruction looks like in terms of project-based learning. And so we run our PBL World Conference every June in Napa. This year we had people from 6 continents, 13 countries. And one of the significant learnings out of that is that people were using the same languages from a variety of very different cultures. And the other thing that could come out of that is the fact that teachers are not on an island. We have several active Google Plus communities, and we'll push out the links to those things right now. But if you read the postings in there, invariably there's a dozen a week that say, I am a 6th grade teacher, I'm a 4th grade teacher, I'm new to project-based learning, I'm looking for help, is there anybody out there? Voices in the wilderness. And so one of the things that a Gold Standard could do is to sort of energize these online communities in these face-to-face events like PBL World so that people realize they are not on an island. And education truly is a global phenomenon because travel is global, and because finance is global, and because pop culture is global. They realize they're not on an island, and they have people that they can reach to, and that there are standards that everybody agrees upon what good instruction looks like.
Okay. All right, so I'll ask our guests for a final word or a farewell in a minute, but let me just wrap up this hangout by reminding you it's being archived at BIE.org. And you can post questions on the Google Plus events page. And we'll answer them either right at the end of the Hangout or afterward on the event page. Please offer comments also on John Mergendoller's blog on the Gold Standard. Bernie, you're back.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay. Bernie, let me get to you then. We went to 2 questions without you there. What do you see as sort of the challenges of implementing a Gold Standard worldwide? And the second question would be, what are your hopes for what a Gold Standard might do for worldwide PBL?
Yeah. Hopes. Well, I think there's a real continuum out there of adoption. So I think the Gold Standard is going to be really important to help drive that. And I think there's 4 things on that continuum that the Gold Standard has to address. The first thing is that it has to make PBL the meal. And there's a lot of range in how much it is the meal and how much is the dessert or a side course or an appetizer. The second thing, it has to make it appeal. Meal appeal. The appeal is got to be to the passions of students, their interests, their motivations, as well as to the teachers, as well as to the administrators. There has to be a strong appeal and a drive to do really great projects. The third one is what Sam often says, which is make it real, and I also say make it heal. Make it real, and that's a real world project. It's something that's relevant. There's a public audience for it, and maybe it can actually improve a little bit of the world and heal a bit of the world too. There's a big continuum across that. So make it the meal, make it appeal, make it real and heal, and the last one is make it the whole deal, and that is to integrate all those pieces together: the infrastructure, the standards, the tools, the professional development. Integrate all of that into an education system so that the entire education system is supportive and the community is supportive of the kinds of wonderful projects that we know kids can do with the help of teachers, administrators, and the entire community. And I think that's the formula that the Gold Standard is going to have to address: the meal, the appeal, the real and heal, and also the whole deal.
Okay, I like that. Is that written up anywhere, Bernie? You want to write us a
right here on my paper, and I'll send it to you.
Okay, I like that. And Bernie, how about 5 years from now? If you hope, if the global standard for PBL does go into effect, what would you hope to see in 5 years?
Well, I would like to see a real transformation of learning, so that all students have an opportunity to learn the skills that they really need for future learning, for lifelong learning, for work and community participation. And that's best done through a project approach to learning, so that opportunity level goes way up across the entire world, and students everywhere have the opportunity to get the skills, the understandings, and the mindsets necessary to be successful.
Okay, thanks. We all share that hope. All right, so final wrap-up then. As I said, we'll answer questions later on the Google Plus events page, and please offer comments on our blog as well at BIE.org. I'll come back just for a second for a final wrap-up, a word from Gina, and then Dave, and then Bernie, either a final thought or a goodbye. Gina?
Sure. So I really appreciate what Bernie said, that we do believe that all students should have the opportunity to learn this way. And one of my final hopes for the Gold Standard is that it invites people to participate who were on the fence, who were afraid to participate, who weren't sure about project-based learning. I hope that whatever the final version ends up becoming, and I know that it will always continue to evolve because we're a learning organization and that's a core value of ours. But I hope that it invites people to participate so more students can have this opportunity, because we believe that they all deserve it. So that'd be my final thought.
All right. Dave, final thought?
My final thought is really that this is a time of tremendous optimism. If you look at just the news, it's been a pretty horrible summer around the world, but I honestly think we're entering a golden age of education. I think there's never been more opportunity. There's never been more consensus about what good instruction looks like. There's never been more consensus about what's important to kids and what this means for them as they inherit the world from us. This is a wonderful time to move forward.
All right. Bernie?
Yeah, I agree with Dave. I've been at this for a number of decades, and I have never been more optimistic than now. I see so many forces that are pushing a different kind of learning and instruction, a different kind of education system, and the tools that are available now to do it are just driving all kinds of wonderful learning. My son's a real maker, and I ask him frequently, where did you learn that? And the answer most often is YouTube. So I think that the tools are supporting a real major transformation. And I see a younger generation who's going into the teaching profession and administration profession that is going to help this whole process out and transform education to the kind of education we've always wanted. It used to be called progressive. Now it just is just logical that we just do it.
All right, Bernie. Thanks.
Yeah.
Nice to have your decades-long perspective. I've got it too. All right, so that's it for today's Hangout, and we're going to be skipping next Tuesday, but next Hangout will be on Tuesday, September 23rd, same time, noon Pacific time here in California. Topic is the gold standard for project-based learning and the 4 C's: critical thinking, collaboration, communication, and creativity. What might a global standard for the 4 C's in PBL look like and do? All right, so thanks for joining us, everybody. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Yeah.
Thanks, Bernie. Thanks, Gina.
My pleasure.